Electrocast.
Hold on to your butts.
We are changing the course of history as we see it. That is what Wesley demands.
Now, this affects Iris. Iris, where are you?
What you feel only matters to you.
I do not entertain hypotheticals. The world as it is vexing enough.
Iris, I have a tip for you.
Don't take drugs!
Or whatever movies with Wesley and Iris.
Bonjour and welcome to... Wait. Bonjour and welcome to Or Whatever Movies. I'm your co-host, Iris, and I'm here with my older brother,
Wesley.
Today, we're talking a movie from 2024, three-time Oscar-nominated Napoleon.
Come on. What, is it best sound? Is it best visual effects and editing?
Production design, visual effects, yes. And costume?
Costumes are pretty good, I guess.
Yeah, dude, at that coronation, everyone's all glittery and stuff. And I'm like, I don't know who any y'all are, but you look great.
But it was for military uniforms because their clothing wasn't really functional when they weren't in military uniform. Josephine, obviously, 150 years before the invention of the modern bra.
She's corseted under that thing, right?
Not all the time. Not upon their first meeting.
Napoleon was being held together by his uniform. Like, if he took it off, he would just, like, fall into a pool of mush.
You know, Kelly Ray made a comment about that, too. She's like, his uniform doesn't really fit him well, does it? And so I took a look at it. Like, he looked
like
stiff
it was holding
and
him
awkward,
together.
Right? But it's holding together the blob.
I was worried that he had, like, zero neck control without the collar.
And as evidenced later on the island, he had the epaulets and the frickin' hat and stuff. He's
right.
Talking to his daughters who, boy, for a military strategist and a military leader, he let his daughters, somebody taught them fencing, and whoever taught them fencing needed to be guillotined because those kids, that was terrible fencing technique. But he was all in his uniform and in his hat at home.
Right. But then the support gave out and he just toppled over.
Yeah, someone took the ribbon off his neck.
Those girls weren't that bad. I mean, do you fence with one arm behind your back?
Number one, you thrust, and they were just like snapping their sticks together in the air above their heads. It was bad form.
Yeah. You have to like thrust and parry.
Yeah,
Is that
I'm
it?
saying
Is that the lingo?
if you're gonna put your hand behind your back as though to fence, do it right. Anyway. But no one ever said that Ridley Scott's Napoleon did it right.
As reflected in the box office? What do you mean?
No, talk about a lesson in historical accuracy and dramatic and poetic license.
I have to say I wasn't really tracking the history. I assumed that the battles happened as they did and in the order that they did. I was like resigned to just tracking the character study and the love story. So was it historically inaccurate?
I'm talking out of my ass, basically, because Kelly Ray was like, he was definitely poisoned at one point, right? And she's like in Waterloo and stuff, and she's rattling off these historical facts. And I was like, I don't know, dude. She was like, well, what happened at Waterloo? And I was like, I don't know, ABBA? And she knew a lot of stuff that I didn't know. So to suggest that I'm like calling out the historical inaccuracy would be absurd for me to do. For some reason, Napoleon is kind of a blind spot. I heard that his soldiers shot the nose off the Sphinx when I was in Cairo, and that's not true. He also didn't shoot the pyramids, but one historian who was put on the spot on YouTube estimated about 37 minutes of this 2.5 hour plus film was historically accurate. And the rest was embellishment, almost like, this is not what he said, but I'm saying that almost like this might have been something that Napoleon would have recounted, what he would have said. Yes, 2,000 men went into the ice when our cannons broke up the ice, when historically it was anywhere from 2 men to 200 men. A lot of his figures, the death tolls and stuff were embellished. I guess what wasn't embellished was how many people actually legitimately died under his command. Fantastic amounts. So much so that when he returns and he's facing the fifth who's blocking the road, and he's like, you want to shoot me, guys? Shoot me, but otherwise I'm back. And they're like, Vive la France! And like embracing him and stuff. I was like, dude, he killed most of your buddies. Why are you still loyal to this dude? So all that to say that some historical license was taken.
I don't know how you make a tyrant like Napoleon sympathetic without taking some historical and poetic license. Ridley Scott's version of Napoleon seemed like a dude who was in the trenches, on the battlefield, not afraid to show his fear, not afraid to show his strangeness and his idiosyncrasies that he had. If he wasn't charming, he had will, and people were drawn to that. It seemed like a guy that you could get behind. That's kind of weird to say.
I suppose, but I do figure there were modern influences. His prowess on the battlefield versus in the bedroom, his seeming ineptitude in the face of someone like Josephine. Maybe there was some Hitler-esque stuff. Certainly there were seeds of a Napoleonic complex, which may or may not be a real thing. Obviously it's a real thing for some people, but he wasn't absurdly short, as some reports had suggested, and thus he didn't have an inferiority complex. But he seemed like he was a freak in the streets, but not in the sheets, in that he was kind of a wuss when it came to Josephine. She was his commandant.
Right. And so because that seemed to be their dynamic, where she was in control when it came to the bedroom, it was weird to me that he was so pissed. I mean, I get that he was pissed at her affair and that it was a public embarrassment and all that stuff. But he comes back and he's like mad at her and he's telling her how bad she is. And in the next scene, she's like, "You belong to me, say it." And I was like, well, that's a quick role reversal.
Yeah, well, she's flexing her own insecurity and inability to control the situation, because he could literally kill her with his hands and nothing would happen to him. But she then reverses it to reassert dominance, I have to assume. It was curious how this movie set him up as being ruthless and a fierce military strategist. Right? Kind of, you mess with the Bonapart, you get blown apart. And then he's so outside he's like, please tell me there's not some other snake in your bed or whatever. And then when he hears about her infidelity, he absolutely doesn't believe it. And then when it's confirmed, I was like, okay, we're going to put someone on the rack and we're going to draw and quarter this dude. How did he never take revenge?
Oh, on the guy who was literally there haunting his coronation?
Yeah, well, so we had a hard time, which one is that guy when he says the cannonball, like a gift from mother or whatever? One of those, that was his brother, right? And we could never keep track of which of those dudes was his brother. And that dude that she gave the side eye to at the coronation, that was the lover guy, not the brother. He was a lover, not a brother.
I assume so. Yeah, okay. That's what I assumed.
I couldn't keep track of who they all had dumb hats.
Yeah. Honestly, the only people that I could continuously identify were Josephine and Napoleon, and maybe sometimes Rupert Everett, but not all the time.
Which one was Rupert Everett?
He was the British general, I think.
Oh. No, all I knew was Napoleon, Josephine, and Duncan the Saltburn vampire.
Oh, who did Duncan play?
He was the guy with the brace on his leg. He was his advisor.
The one that was there throughout, right?
Yeah, perfect companion.
Who's creepier, Duncan or Josephine?
Josephine is dangerous, smoldering, kinda. She had a real air of danger. I seriously thought, did you not think that when he shows up with his heir in the carriage and hands the baby to Josephine, didn't you think she was going to chuck that kid into the water?
Right down to the deep.
And I was like, either she's going in with him or whatever. Yep. And even if they go to grab her, she can hold it underwater for long enough. And so she was scary, but he mostly carried his menace over from Saltburn. He seemed like the ghoulish enforcer / advisor, the devil tapping Napoleon on the shoulder, you know? He was also 7 feet tall, so it helped.
I was wondering if that ship was designed specifically for Napoleon's height out of some kind of vain nautical ambition or something.
Yeah.
But then that was a British ship. He wasn't on his own ship.
Yeah, he was luncheoning on the British ship, which was weird to me because he had just been defeated. And I get it that military strategists and commanders, they meet and they parlay and they have civil discourse and maybe even share a meal. But he was definitely running that ship like it was his house. He's like, yeah, sit down. I'm eating your food.
And then he gives the most pompous Napoleonic statement of the entire movie where he's like, the hardest thing in life is to accept the mistakes of others because I am perfect and it is very hard for me to accept the mistakes of my marshals who cannot place a cannon correctly on the battlefield. Yeah. You're like, what? Wow, you've really gone off the deep end.
It really is all bluster, and he revealed himself behind closed doors that he was just like everyone else. He was weird and insecure and maybe didn't have the clearest trains of thought. But it's long been said that people who excel like in certain ways are deficient in other ways. And Napoleon was made for war and not much else, it seems.
Made for war and maybe food fights. Was that
Yeah.
just the playful version of war? The
Yeah, but
domestic version of war?
He was bad at it, though. He threw
Bad at food fights?
food at Josephine and at the kids and stuff. Yeah, but his aim, like with the grapes or whatever, was pretty bad.
I wonder if there's any historical merit to the food fighting. So, I mean, Josephine is obviously not barren. She has multiple children before she meets Napoleon.
Yes, I had the same question. She had kids in the beginning. I assume that wasn't fabricated because it would actually hurt the credibility of her infertility. I do know that historically speaking, they divorced because he felt it would be better for France should he produce a male heir, and she could not do that for whatever reason. It's suggested that part of his issue may have been syphilis contracted from Josephine, and that goes untreated can lead to, mental distress and stuff. But if she did have kids, she was actually divorced in a public ceremony because of her inability to produce an heir. That's legitimate. How realistic that was, or the reasons for her being able to bear children before and then not later, I'm not really sure.
Well, it didn't seem to damage their relationship all that much. And when she goes and when she arrives at her little massive estate where she's like attended to and stuff, I felt kind of relieved for her. Like, isn't that kind of the best of both worlds?
You would think.
Have your cake and eat it too?
Yeah, but then she got sick and died. What was the reason that her daughter listed?
She names it specifically.
Yeah,
Shoot.
she did. But and I was like, okay, but how does one get sick in a bubble like that? She was essentially exiled, like he was twice. And if you have the same people, where is the illness brought in that she died and it didn't decimate her entire household?
It was pneumonia, but they called it something else.
I had to look up pleurisy. You know pleurisy? Because I was like, why would he know that word? And pleurisy is just a general ailment, like a malady.
I thought it was specific to the lung, is it not?
Right, but pleurisy is a condition, not a diagnosis. Some people can handle exile and some people can't. But I don't know, given that we were raised in a major city, or at least adjacent to the city, I don't know how I would handle the farm in Montana. If there was nothing, and if I was on an island without Netflix or high-speed internet connection, I'm not sure how I would handle it. Best of both worlds, but she was a banging city girl. And what happens when you're just stuck in a house, wandering from room to room in your gauzy dress?
Yeah, I guess she was kind of a prisoner in a way in her exile. She was served and stuff like that, but the only validation that she continued to have was her visits from Napoleon. It was kind of weird. You're right. It was kind of prisoner-esque.
This is a recurring theme, too. The idea that Helen caused the siege of Troy, and that men go to great lengths because they have issues with the women in their lives. It was as though to suggest, it was almost like Napoleon in Love was the title of this movie, and that he just couldn't quit her. I was really afraid. Even I worry what's going to happen when Ringo runs this outfit. Lord have mercy. And like when Josephine dies, I was like, he's going to go crazy.
Yeah.
He's going to start killing people in France but he wasn't. He was a patriot.
He was a patriot and he loved France. If there was anything that he loved more than Josephine, it was France. But he does go off the rails a little bit.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, they walk into that battle when they're in the war room or whatever and they're looking at the map. I feel like he can see the defeat. He just won't admit to it. Like, they definitely go into that battle prepared to die and be defeated. Well, what choice does he have?
He might have had no choice, but I don't think he was going into it knowing that this would be his last stand. I think that he believed if we prevent them from joining forces, and if we strike them here hard, fast in the back, and then cut them off and defeat these two separately, then our 120 or whatever can beat their 140 and their 80. And he was looking at it like 5 individual battles or something. But I do think that given his history and his successes on the battlefield, he believed he could win and was like, okay, now move him in and cavalry and all that stuff. And then he was shocked when he came up against a military strategist that he couldn't outsmart, if not in strategy, by sheer number of troops that they were both willing to sacrifice.
Yeah, they did have some, like the square of men seemed pretty impenetrable. Like they seemed like they had some real strategy. But he goes in bravely.
We're moving ahead, but that last battle was confusing. This movie trades on Napoleon as a fierce military strategist and a cunning strategist at that. And it seemed like they were completely and hopelessly outmatched on the battlefield at Waterloo. I don't understand why they did that thing where they condense and the French were just riding around them waiting to get picked off like a shooting gallery.
Right.
It was frustrating.
They couldn't penetrate, so they were just circling and yeah.
Like, what was the plan? You know, like Braveheart style, you just charge into the bayonets, sacrifice your horses, but you make a breach. And when you make that opening, everyone else pours in, you know?
I didn't know why you had to beat that level in order to advance the next. Like, why didn't the cavalry just go in for whatever the next line was? Or go straight for the military, the generals. It seemed weird that they had to beat the infantry, who were all squared up and stuff, in order to proceed with the battle. I think
life is hard, but finding a really great podcast makes the days go by so much easier. Hi, my name is Blue Toulousma. I'm a writer, an emotional intelligence coach, and the host of Humanize with Blue Toulousma, a podcast where we believe that when you humanize everyone in the room, a great conversation is almost guaranteed. Join us every week here on Electricast as me and my guest co-hosts unpack big topics and interview even bigger personalities with a sense of humor and a dash of mischief. If you're looking for a new best friend in your head, we've got you covered. Electricast.
in that battle, his ambition outweighed his militaristic might. But also, wasn't he smarter than just hoping for the best?
I don't know. He should have known that Josephine was a dead end, and he should have moved on. He should have maybe cut his losses, but he was like, never surrender, when surrendering might have enabled him to live and fight another day. He just kind of, marched to his doom.
Doesn't it seem a little ironic that this movie about vainglory and ambition kind of coincides with the ambition of an overly ambitious film?
Well, Ridley Scott directs Gladiator, and he is known for historical epics. And he was like, I don't even know if I should do a historical epic these days because everyone loves superhero movies or whatever. It did seem a little bit paint by numbers. There was a scene where they're congregating at the tree line that was almost straight out of Gladiator, and a lot of it looked similar, but I understand. So this is an Apple TV original. These filmmakers, Martin Scorsese in particular, they're benefiting from streamers willing to throw obscene amounts of money at movies to establish them as major players, as streaming platforms as major studios. So they give Martin Scorsese hundreds of millions of dollars, and they're like, go make The Irishman, go make Apple, Killers of the Flower Moon. And Apple likewise backed Napoleon to the tune of $200 million. Which non-superhero movies aren't really willing to do. Now, it's made just over that worldwide, something like $207 million the last I checked, which is not a good return. You're going to need to make more. But their whole plan is to put it on streaming. And let me tell you, he says he believes without a break, without the ability to pause, the average viewer can watch about 2.5 hours before they start to get restless or they start to blame their restlessness on the movie. Their attention wanes. The cut on Apple TV is supposed to be 4 hours long.
What?
That's maybe too much Napoleon. And so what I was getting to is that the way he could make a hugely ambitious movie on this scale is by not belaboring the process. He did a sort of a more Clint Eastwood vibe of not too many crazy takes. And I think in some ways it shows. This is not a picture perfect movie. It doesn't show Napoleon as a flawless hero. It's not glamorous all the time. It was gritty and raw and kind of hastily made for a methodical filmmaker like Ridley Scott. And I think it showed a little bit. This wasn't Braveheart to me. And Braveheart was down in the dirt and bloody and graphic too, but it seemed to me more cohesive. You understood the strategy of hold, and this one seemed more haphazard.
Which might be a result of the filmmaking and the filmmaking process, or may have been more realistic. I mean, don't get me wrong, when they all start charging and stuff, I definitely got that feel. I mean, this was violent and gruesome and pretty hard to take at times, but it felt like that kind of Braveheart-esque historical epic. It felt like a return to form, not only for Ridley Scott, but for movies. And there was something really oddly familiar and kind of comforting about that. But I don't know, maybe because I was lost so much of the time, it felt like unmotivated violence and gore.
In an interesting way, Kelly Ray is not about horror movies or war movies. And this was definitely a war movie, and people and horses got blown the hell apart. But she was not riveted, but she was definitely tracking all the war scenes, and like terrible stuff would happen and she'd be like, ew, or whatever. But it's not like she was like, okay, it's a war scene, now it's time to play on my phone or anything. But for whatever reasons, these scenes held her attention in a way that I was a little bit surprised by. Riveting, return to old form or whatever. That's not to say that she was interested going into the movie. She's like, Napoleon. And I was like, you said you'd watch it. But she was kind of enthralled. Like it's maybe one of the distinctions that Ridley Scott has, that not many people can do what he does on a scale like this these days.
Yeah. So in that sense, it was welcomed, and I felt like he had all of the ingredients. When I saw the trailer for Napoleon, I think when I saw Killers of the Flower Moon, I was like, oh yeah, I'm into that. Joaquin Phoenix as Napoleon, yes. Vanessa Kirby, so creepy, and Ridley Scott and all that. So it felt like he had all of the right ingredients. And I'm not saying that it was a funky stew, but I can see why, despite this being an epic from a major Hollywood player, it wasn't necessarily the awards bait that Apple thought it would be.
Not a funky stew, for sure, but it was not as heavy a story. It had been done countless times. There are so many Napoleon adaptations, but his end was kind of unceremonious. He didn't sacrifice himself on the battlefield in order to win a war for France. He was just kind of exiled and keeled over at the picnic table. There were countless battle scenes, and there was the Russian Tsar and the Austrian guy, and I was like, who's the dude? He's the guy. No, he's which one is France? France. They have the
sometimes there were multiple Frances.
Right? They had the water buffalo hat, but the Austrians were the fuzzy-headed beef, what are they called? Beef eater dudes? And
right.
And I was like, wait, but those guys behind him when he strolls into Moscow, those are French guys with the fuzzy hats? And she said, no, I think they're Austrian. And I'm like, but wait, I didn't exactly know who everyone was all the time, even in the midst of the battle. When they allowed the guys to charge into their camp, which were not empty. I thought they were empty, but then they would flank them, or not really flank them, but ambush them from the side and come down the hill and join in the fighting. I was like, how do you keep those people apart? Like the Northman style. Like they're all in the fuzzy hats and grunting and screaming. How do you know not to shoot your dudes?
This is where I think it gets a little bit strange. I'm sure that these Oscar-nominated costumers were meticulous about their costuming and who wore what and what medals they wore to express their rank and which army was this army and that. I'm sure that was all in order. Why not just go the extra mile, dumb it down, and help us understand who is who? And this is also a place where I felt like the accents could have helped. Okay, I get it. You want to go American accent? That's a choice. But help us out here, at least in another way.
Oh, man. So they would be fighting, and the Russians would be like, arg! And the French would be like, arg, arg.
I'm just saying, even when they're in their diplomatic situations and they're all talking and stuff, I was like, why did the French have the British accents, but some of the British don't have British accents? And Napoleon definitely does not have a French accent. Like, what is happening here?
Oh, God. It was so American. And not. Ridley Scott is not American. But he just didn't care. It worked for Gladiator, won Best Picture. He was going to do it again. At least Mel Gibson had a Scottish accent, even if it may not have been an authentic Scottish accent. To our ears, it sure sounded Scottish. And in Braveheart, you can tell because the English have chainmail and those elaborate outfits, and the Scots are wearing kilts. And that's how you know who you can kill. Don't kill the kilts. And in this one, they were all kind of dressed the same. It was difficult because they were both French, but Vanessa Kirby had a British accent and Joaquin Phoenix definitely doesn't. He was like, destiny has brought me this lamb chop. And I was like, he's issuing military commands, and he's not imposing. He's shouting military instructions, and it sounds like a weak little man who's trying to play soldier, when of course that's not the case.
He is as French as he is a Rastafarian rapper.
Wait, Rastafarian rapper? Oh, you're talking about I'm Not There? Yes. I'm Still Here?
Whatever that Casey Affleck folly was.
Yeah, almost killed both of them.
It almost killed them?
Almost destroyed their careers.
Oh, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Oh, man.
He's bounced back to
both
Napoleon.
of them Oscar winners nowadays.
All right. IMDb user reviews 6 stars, an interesting failure.
Yeah, that's pretty good. So maybe the messiness that you're talking about is trying to reconcile that they had the costumings down. I'm sure that they planned the military strategy, being that this was a focal point of the movie, down to the letter. But his choices were questionable, at least as they were portrayed on screen. It was interesting because they tried to do a lot, and part of their charm, I guess, was the imperfection of their character, especially together. Interesting in a way.
I think meta, too. This is a not failure of a movie, but perhaps a disappointment for a disappointing military career.
It wasn't the Oscar bait that they hoped for. Maybe it went out like a whimper, kind of like Napoleon himself. Didn't get the nominations, didn't get the box office. That's really, what else is there?
5 stars, history is an undesired guest in Mr. Scott's movie.
People have come at Ridley Scott and said, hey, what about this historical inaccuracy? And he said, and I quote, "Go F yourself. How about you get a life?" And he wasn't interested. He wanted to tell the compelling story, but bringing like historical accuracy to the letter was never the intention. And I think that was kind of clear. Because not knowing a whole lot about Napoleon, I did know that he didn't fire cannons at the pyramids, and they did that thing, and it was just, it's meant for spectacle and for fun.
Does Joaquin Phoenix have a tick, like a Leo finger or a Ryan Gosling yelp?
I think that he's a little bit of a mumbler, and I think that his characters are neurotic and unsure, so he does that tight-lipped, I'm confused, but I'm afraid to speak up kind of thing. He seems very repressed and uncomfortable most of the time. But maybe that's just his performances.
Yeah, neurotic and I would say weird.
Weird, just
and he
weird.
Definitely brought out the weird, and therefore, in this weird way, the humanity in Napoleon. It was a little long, and sometimes I felt like stuff was just happening, and I was assuming that there was historicity to it. But overall, I enjoyed his performance, and I enjoyed Vanessa Kirby's performance, and I'm glad to see Ridley Scott kind of back to form. I'll give this a non-critical good.
I'll give it an all right, but I definitely had issues, and we could pick it apart all day. He's like, I've got the Emperor in my sights, permission to fire, and I was like, no, you don't. You have a flintlock rifle. I don't care if you have a telescope mounted on that thing. You're not hitting anybody. You got like a ball that you're packed in there with gunpowder. You have no accuracy. He was doing infertility wrong. There was no social media. You get the 18-year-old hooker pregnant or whatever, and then you play it off as Josephine's kid. She's the empress, for God's sake. Nobody's going to know. And if you're going to do that anyway, just keep her by your side so you don't have to visit her in exile and secrecy. They definitely had character development, not to suggest that they didn't, but I decided that Josephine is Jenny Curran and Napoleon is Forrest Gump. She's bad for him, and he can't, there's nothing he can do about it. He's just going to go and influence history and blow people apart with cannons.
Well, he's got to hold on to the only good thing in his life, even if it's bad.
I think more than anything, Napoleon is a curious study in how you're going to make a movie that people are going to come for because it's saddled with history and with well-known events, and you're just like, no, F you, I'm going to do what I want.
Ridley Scott, you think you're so great because you've got Gladiator?
Yeah.
It was just like this petty little moment where he's like, you think you're so great because you've got boats.
Oh, yeah, boats,
like, Ridley
boats,
Scott,
yeah.
Ridley Scott, you think you're so great because you got Gladiator.
Yep.
But I'll still give you a good. And that's our discussion on Napoleon, a movie about audacity by an audacious filmmaker from 2023, available on Apple TV+. If you enjoyed this discussion, check out 300 others at orwhatevermovies.com or wherever you get podcasts. And au revoir.
If you're a working professional wondering what's next for your career, you've come to the right place. Whether you're looking for a promotion, growth, or a potential career transition, look no further. With over 30 years working in a variety of industries, I share my insider knowledge with those ready to get ahead on Career Advancement with Craig Ansell. Tune in to get your strategies for success.
Hi, I'm Mark.
And I'm Peter.
We're the founders of Electrocast Media, bringing you great podcasts like Nightmare Road Stories, Tech Talk Revolution, and Bodacious Minds.
Electrocast networks include Ruby for female empowerment, the Best Business Network, and GPN for geopolitics. We built this company to create community and amplify diverse voices, and we really appreciate your support.
So, keep listening to Electrocast podcasts and hear the culture.
Electrocast.